Okay, today we're going to learn about the people of ancient Anatolia. They're known as the Hittites. If you study their culture professionally, you're pretty much called Lewians. They're people of ancient Asia Minor, the area of Anatolia, just above the Holy Land on the apex of the Aegean Sea. Troy, people like that through there, and laters. This is a dissertation that's given by Eberhard Zanger. He's a German archaeologist who's been working on the site, and his course this is like the third time through on it. But because they involved archaeoastronomy and such, it actually let them be people that really showed how much importance that this culture had to the Fertile Crescent. People know about Egypt, and then they talk about the merchants of the Phoenicians, who really called themselves Canaan, so the Canaanites and so on around there. And we know about the ancient Sumerians. People know about the Akkadians that come after that and take over and so on, but there's one on that little loop right there that's right in the middle. Yeah, right in the middle. And so let's look at this. This is going to be fairly long, so grab a cup of tea. Here we go.
Conclusions are astronomy and astrology were part of Bronze Age religions. And Hattusha, that's the Hittite capital, which you will see in a number of slides, was designed to serve celestial deities. Temples and gates reflect astronomical parameters. Yassilikaya functioned as a lunisolar calendar, and an enormous amount of discoveries can still be made. So these are the main conclusions, and if they don't tell you anything, don't worry. You will be able to give a talk about this in 1 hour.
He makes a lot of jokes in this one. I've seen this presentation 3 times now. This one seems to be the most loose of the 3, but also I like the slides and things like that. He tells a couple of jokes. He tells a soccer joke at the very first of it and so on, and talks. He's got some of the people there that were the archaeoastronomers and stuff that worked with him, so he kind of keeps making gestures to them during this time and stuff. He also gives a list of places that he already has made this lecture at and has upcoming, and it seems to be quite a list. It's very popular, and it's already been peer reviewed pretty much. In fact, it's getting a lot of hoot out of people that have any type of case studies that go along with this. A lot of people in your audience here, you're going to notice that they're a little bit elders and stuff, and so it's got a lot to do with academia and so on also. But he's going to answer these few questions as we go through here, and I want to give the list and everything so you're well aware of how it works.
So first of all, who were the Hittites and the Luwians? And that's the first subject that I will speak about. And then I will speak about astronomical alignments in Hattusha, the Hittite capital. And then we will talk about the rock sanctuary of Yassilikaya, which is right there in Hattusha. And in particular, look at how to determine the solstices and how to keep a calendar, basically. And in the end, I will also mention some open questions. So let's dive right into this.
You notice he looked into your eye directly right there when he said, let's dive right into this. I'll pause here just for a second to give you a chance, if you want to pause, grab a coffee, anything you need, because it's probably going to be a 3-parter. Each part that succeeds this is going to be up in your upper top left-hand corner. We'll go to the succession of it, 45-minute intervals, and go to the next one. I'm going to try to let him talk as much as possible and just interject whenever needed to. Pretty much. Okay, we're back.
Who were the Hittites and the Luwians? Well, as Matthias Oertle said at the beginning, the field of interest is the late Bronze Age Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean, and late Bronze Age is indicated here as 1650 to 1190 BC. So basically we are in the 2nd millennium BC and in the Eastern Mediterranean. And if we look at the cultures there that are well defined today, there is the Minoan culture with Knossos as a central place. Then there is the Mycenaean culture with Mycenae, of course, as one of the prime sites. And those neatly fall into the boundaries of Europe, basically. This, and together with the Cycladic culture on the islands in the Aegean, basically defined Aegean Bronze Age up until a few years ago and maybe even today. At some point, the Hittites in Central Asia Minor were.
So if you'll look, I had to break it right there. If you'll look, he's noticing that a lot of these islands, and we've known this for years, are all hooked up to this civilization, the Greeks, the Minoans, Mycenaeans, so on. They come out of this, but also you can see certain islands like that one right there are taken from it or not. Troy is outside of the boundary, so we're back in that time, but not quite back to that date totally. But he's going to sweep through that time, and he's going to make two mentions, I believe, in the whole thing about how long that they had been here before. For he's going to talk about their currents and where they were up and what they were doing. But it goes back much further. But then again, we're looking at these Hattusha people in Asia Minor and how that hooks up.
Added to the picture because in Hattusha there were excavations starting 1906, and they produced a number of monuments and over 33,000 documents and fragments. So there was no denying that there was a major culture in central Anatolia. But basically it leaves out, this is the picture until today, it leaves out one important area, and that is the western part of modern Turkey, where according to existing paradigms, there was very little to speak about. And we wanted to fill this picture and therefore founded in 2014 Lewian Studies. Lewian is a toponym for the people who lived in Western Anatolia during the late Bronze Age and Middle Bronze Age, so during the second millennium BC. It's not an ethnic term, even though there was a language that was spoken, that's Lewian, over several thousand years.
And they say that it's derived from Proto-Indo-Europeans. They say that they can find that there are loanwords and things that come with it, but then, of course, some of the even earliest names that they have are showing this, and some echoes down through time. They have their own cuneiform writing, too, just like the Egyptians and so on. It's not so blockaded, but it's also apparently read from left to right, and then right to left, and then left to right, and then right to left, and so on. Gods are denoted, as you see up there in the top left-hand corner, with that Fa symbol that's there, that looks like kind of like a belt buckle, if you will. That's just like the God symbol, if you would, circling their name in Egypt, or when you see Dengir, the star symbol, along with people in ancient Sumeria. So it's pretty much the same thing. In fact, there are pyramid-looking drawings on here too, stars and such, and he'll get into it.
And there's also a script that looks like this. They had their own hieroglyphic script, which was in use for more than 1,000 years, and it's very beautiful. This particular item is 4 meters wide, and it comes from Hattusha, from the Südburg.
Quick last break in here. I don't know if you'd make it out, but see that little thing right there? It's like a pyramid, but it has a halo actually around it, and then below it, it has streaks. People have said, look, it's a spaceship. I used to draw spaceships that looked like that when I was a kid. Yeah, let's go
on. And this is what the center of the Hittites in central Anatolia, Hattusha, actually looked like back then. A stretch of the fortification wall that was reproduced by the German Archaeological Institute, who has been working there for 80 years approximately.
Oh, I wanted to catch it while it's up there so I could say something about it. Sorry, we're going to back it up 5 seconds, but you look at this wall, and then there's that corbel top that's onto it, and if it was more squared off as opposed to rounded as you see in this, one would recognize it as the Spanish castle or castles of England and things like that. Its architecture is very much defined, and then looking back at this time right here, wow. Well, you can look at also like temples that Jet had to do with and so on, and other early Egyptians, and they almost had a modern looking type architecture. and then it was pulled into a colonnaded type style. Now this is a recreation. He's going to tell you this is the largest scientific experiment ever done, because they tried to recreate it exactly like the people, the technology of everything at that time, and they set it back up. And then now, through normal wear and tear, they want to see what goes on with it and all these tests and so on like that. And they're going to have a real model of such, but it's nowhere near the size of the real wall that used to be here. Let him tell you.
Of the fortification wall that was reproduced by the German Archaeological Institute, who has been working there for 80 years approximately. So they reconstructed a stretch using the same techniques, building techniques, as they existed 3,000 years ago. It's about 150 meters long, but the total size of the wall was 6.8 kilometers.
Wow.
It's the largest experiment in the largest project in experimental archaeology ever conducted in the world. I will also show you the smallest project in experimental archaeology ever conducted.
Well, it may not actually be the smallest, but he's making a joke about what he's going to show you something later. But so something that they're having to do along with this deal is this huge, but also part of things that's just as important almost when he gets into it. If you check it out, it's something very, very small, and it took some weird thing. Check it.
So Hattusha, the center of the Hittite civilization, is located at the southern end of a plain. Here you can see the 6.8 kilometer
6.8 kilometer wall. You can only see about 2/3 of it there on the bottom, and it runs out of it, but it's huge, and it cuts over and even goes over a river at one point, like they did in Uruk and other places like that. It's actually kind of trapped between two rivers right there, but this culture has other people that are attached to it that run all up this river, and in between this, and this is Delis River here, and it runs out to the right and goes more towards the Caucasus Mountains type of area. So people are connected with this and get distributed after the end of the Bronze Age and things get ruined. This is one of the people who no longer have a name and breaks into separate city-states and become people that we know of as the Colkins, the Mitanni, and so on like that come out of it. But that's for probably other videos when we break it down. He's showing you right now where they worked up to it in this valley situation.
Wall surrounding the city, and you see that it's pretty high, between 1,200 and 1,400 meters in elevation. And the city itself was basically dedicated to temples and the upper echelons of the society, the palace. But the ordinary people lived in quarters outside, not within these walls. And
so also, this is just for the elite. So you see the amount of city that is, and how many kilometers that wall is, and so the civilization lived all around it, and up those rivers and so on, connected all with it. So it was much huger than they're showing right there, even in that glimpse, but just wanted to mention that.
You also see indicated Yassilikaya, the rock sanctuary, about which I will speak towards the end of my talk. It's considered one of the holiest places of the Hittite realm.
It's pretty cool too.
This is a picture where you see Hattusha, difficult to recognize, in the whole upper part of the photo behind this ravine. So this road is actually the road that tourists take through the site. It's something unusual that you have to take your car into an archaeological site, and it still takes you to a day to see the whole place. It's so big. It's 180 hectares, which is 100 times the size of Troy 6.
He just mentions that in passing somewhat, but 180 hectares, 10 times the size of Troy.
Excavations there started in 1906, and as I said, they have produced very many fragments and documents of text, and they are written in cuneiform. And in the 1920s, it was recognized that there were 8 different languages recorded in this cuneiform.
So they found a Rosetta Stone, if you will, off of it. But they have all these writings and stuff in it, and so they went through that and they fudged on. And then what really threw them off until a modern day was, well, the city is kind of built all this way and that way, and what, and so the whole left half of the hall thought and the left half of the brain there got left out in it. He'll mention it later.
So this is the upper part of the city, and you see the foundations of the temples that have been excavated. For 400 years, Hattusha was the capital of the Hittites. Some call it empire, the Hittite kingdom.
He says empire or kingdom, and really, if they were a kingdom over that area, and then they were the one that was controlling and running it, like when Egypt is running more of Libya and all these things and stretching out, and Nubia behind them and everything, that becomes somewhat of an empire. When they're doing it here, their empire seems to have encompassed all of that area, a little farther off of that map even than it even showed. Not just that little purple blurb, that's just the capital city. There are other cities hooked up to it, and a lot of people are fighting to this day on whether or not Troy was that hooked up with them, and that was it, and this was that, or were they the people that were fighting? How did that work out? That's for another video. It's raining there, coming this way, but you can see all those runes laid out in front of you. And I don't know if you look, but you can see some of them are facing this way and some of them are facing that way. And yeah, continue.
It's interesting that the city does not have a technical purpose. It's very difficult to reconcile why the gates are in the places where they are, because they don't really make much sense in terms of utility. But
until you pull in sacred geometry and where things coming up, whether it's daylight, stars.
Hittites had 100 up to 165 religious festivals per year, so that kept them occupied. The foundations you see here are all temples. There are 30 of them altogether up there in the upper city. And as you all can also see, there's no particular arrangement to these temples. And so the archaeologists came up with a conclusion. It is of note that no special direction of the compass seems to have been preferred, either for the orientation of the temples or for that of the cult chambers themselves. See the cult chambers later. Anywhere around the globe, people oriented their constructions towards astronomical parameters, but in Hattusha, apparently, according to the paradigms here, not. But this is quite wrong, as we now know. So, with it.
And he was the one that kind of helped discover this, along with the lady that's the first one to the right there. It was the lead of some of these archaeoastronomers that went there along with him and figured it out. And it does seem like through his talks he does relay the fact that, well, he probably said, well, you might find something in this, that, and the other, but a little bit skeptical. And then once everything started laying out, he was like, okay. And then they kept showing me more and more and more. And as we get deeper in this, it starts to get incredible, where shadows play and all these type of things that all laid in that you wouldn't probably believe if somebody didn't actually have it work out, because they had it happen right in front of them.
We come already to the second part of my talk. Astronomical alignments in Hattusha. What does it mean, an astronomical alignment? You can see here the great temple of Hattusha, drawn in the year when it was first seen by a European scholar in 1834 by Charles Texier. And as it turns out, all the walls that are pointing towards us are actually astronomically aligned. They are aligned towards the sunset at summer solstice, the longest day of the year. And we know such alignments and that they existed from other places where the buildings are still intact. Here we are in Egypt, in Karnak. The Karnak temple was erected around 2000 BC, so it's over 4,000 years old, and it's astronomically aligned to the sunrise during the winter solstice.
Now, the winter solstice, I think I cut him off. I didn't know if he was going to say it or not. The winter solstice is the shortest day of the year, And you can find that and say that's your new year if you want to. You can do it this time, you can do it at time. Some ancient people did it around their harvest time. So it wasn't necessarily where the dead of winter was affecting you and you had to make it through that. It was actually back before that. Now it's hard to find the longest day of the year unless you're super measuring time and things like that, but that got happening. In this temple right here, you can see these sphinxes, but also in the time of Aries, as opposed to having the sphinx heads you're familiar with on it, they had rams, like Ramses.
Shortest day of the year, as you can see here when this picture was taken. You may wonder, in 4,000 years, haven't astronomical parameters shifted? And they have shifted a bit, about by the diameter of one sun, if I'm correct. Peter nods.
He looks at her for approval because she's the expert on such. And over time, we have moved just about almost the width of a sun from exactly where it would be. So sometimes when you see it, these charts and alignments, they didn't even have it figured out on where it used to be. And other stars and constellations, because everything's off just a hair, we're off just a hair. So when people look at some of these things, they go, oh, well, that's not quite right. Well, it's not just north. That's constant. This is constant. If they were looking at alignments, that can be off a little bit. And so when you see that one where it looks like it just comes through the edge of the door and goes out the right, that used to come right through the center of that thing because it was about one width over. And it keeps doing so over a period of time. Let's continue.
And that means it would have even fitted better then, because now you see the sun on top of this gate. Back then it was right in the gate. So there are books by experts on astronomy, and one of them that I have, I found this sentence: neither with Stonehenge nor with any other monument can this important day, the summer solstice, be determined.
That's not actually true. Well, it may be the ones that that person was familiar with, but I believe, if my memory serves correctly, that Archium has a hookup that's lined up onto it. And there's a couple of other places they known with these sun wheels when they go, okay, well, this is straight across here. And because that's the median of the summer and winter, if you will, then that would be it.
And the reason why Wolfhard Schlosser said that is because if on the longest day you look into the sun on the day before, you see no difference. It hurts your eyes, and you see no difference within a few days, whether the sun has reached the northest peak and then goes back or not. That's right. But Wolfhard Schlosser has never been to my kitchen. And this is what it looks like in my kitchen a few days before the summer solstice. You can see the shadow moving into the electrical outlets, and once it's reached the electrical outlets, it goes back. And this has worked throughout the history of the Earth, anywhere on the Earth, and it's hard to believe that people didn't notice it. But of course you can say they didn't have electrical outlets back then.
Well, no, but they had different things they could have used. One that comes to mind to me is my mom took some of my grandparents' furniture and put it up in her front room there. And with the sun coming just during a certain time of the year, it would slowly creep over and it would touch on it. And it wasn't that big of a deal till she had had them about 6 or 8 years. And she said, if you come in here and look at it, you can tell it's a little faded and it's starting to affect it. And so she wanted us to move it down just a little bit. And she figured out where it was, and we moved it down just a hair past that, and everything was cool. But then anytime anybody came, she was definite to point out the fact she had to move it down because of blah, 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 blah. It's the same type of situation. Not the same time of year, but regardless.
But they had their means of determining what's going on in nature. And that's one easy trick, for instance, how to determine the cardinal directions. You take a pole of no particular length and a rope of no particular length, and you make a circle around it. And then if it's a sunny day, you will get a shadow, and it crosses the circle once in the morning and once in the afternoon. And if you connect these two lines, then you have a line going from east to west.
I can't believe he just showed it. But that is the sacred way that they had for Sumerians and so many other people. They had figured this out. You can easily do it off of one of the big obelisks, which works somewhat like a sundial, and you wonder what was it and how could you turn around and da-da-da. Oh, they could use that, and all the little temples in the area, they could easily line up off of it. For all he had to do was take and do a maypole thing and do a circle around it, and then watch the shadow, and as long as the shadow breaks the circle, where it does over here, you put a stick in the ground, if you will, or a mark, a stone, whatever you want, and let it go through the whole day, and whenever it casts over the other side, it's got another mark. If you bisect that left to right, you are now making a mark east to west. And you say, oh, well, that worked in Egypt or whatever. No, it works everywhere. To this day, listen.
And again, this works anywhere on Earth, at any time of the year, at any time of Earth's history. And so you can determine the cardinal directions very easily. So we have 4 directions, but there are more. Rita has put together this beautiful panorama from the highest point of Hattusha, looking towards the east, and you can see where the sun rises during summer solstice, indicated with SS, in theory, if the horizon would be flat, and in reality, because there is a relief here. And then you can see where it is during the equinoxes, and you can see where it rises during the winter solstice. And the same of...
Now, so what he's saying here is, look, this wall's lined up from there. All right, well, it's not lined up to north, or it's not unless to east, and so what is it lined up to? And these people said it's not lined up to anything. Now it's actually lined up to that equinox. It's another step of smart past it. If you think about it, you could probably find that north, south, east, west, and the sky spinning around situation, which has more connotations to it. We'll show you later in these other portions here that are coming up. But to find that equinox, he tells you it's tough, and that some of these people weren't looking after that. They were looking after all those numbers and stuff. They also make the comment here that they're looking at the top layer of these people, and they haven't had enough guts, if you will, to take and break down below it and see if some of this stuff comes from a culture that was before it. Preliminary indicates that they didn't, that they just built this up out of nowhere. And she say, well, where were they just before this? That can't happen just like that. Well, they're not looking under the major heart of the city, but you can look around and tell that there's these tells. Yeah, you can tell that there are these tells. They're hooked up right around off of it. Maybe just like Göbekli Tepe, you can come to find out, oh, a lot of the population lived here and here and here. They can find a dating for that because, again, the population is living outside of this giant structure of the city. Right.
Of course, applies to the sunsets. So in addition to the cardinal directions, we get 4 more directions for the sunrises and the sunsets. And if we look at the arrangement of the temples in the upper part of Hattusha, they look like this. And this is work that was conducted by these 2 astrophysicists, Cesar Gonzalez Garcia and Juan Antonio Belmonte, some years ago. They started out in Egypt, measuring the direction of the temples, and then went on to hit.
So they did a thing in Egypt, and then they started working on this. This is the information, but shown on a different graph way, that I showed you whenever I was talking about this before, that there's these guys that say, well, it is hooked up to archaeoastronomy, whenever it says it doesn't. And I was ranting about how, look, it's in Wiki and all these other places, and what people learn, and you're like, oh, well, they didn't have it. And this is something that's special that everybody's around here apparently has and everything. And they go, no, they have it. In fact, they have it more. If you'll listen to him, they have it more than anywhere, but it wasn't noticed. Why? Because instead of everything being pegged on north, like you see, there's a few of them there out of these 60 that they have, they're all going pretty much towards certain ones. There are these other ones that are in there. This is a daylight situation going on and cardinal point. This is not necessarily equinox wise, but then it shows them there at the bottom with SS and WE, and so there are ones that peg on those also. But then there are night ones, and he'll get into that later, and kind of wish he'd do it now, but nah. But there are ones that look like they are not in this, and a lot of those hook up to moon ones and moon situations like west, southwest, in that direction that are just a little off a little bit, have to do with the moon flopping through there. But he'll tell you about it later.
Anatolia, and had altogether 61 buildings that they looked at, and they figured out that there's a very high statistic significance of the distribution. So basically, the buildings are astronomically aligned, and they figured out a way to show this in a normalized histogram in a new form, which is here looking due west, and you see the deviation from west. And there are significant peaks that have a degree of confidence higher than 99%. The tallest peak indicates the winter solstice, and the second peak, the equinoctial. So this is the direction, the number of buildings pointing in that direction.
Out of the groups, there's a whole lot of them pointing the same direction. Well, what are those? Well, that's the summer solstice, and people never figured it in, along with the other ones either. But there's more.
And of course, as I said, they have also done this in Egypt, where you have a similar distribution, but not even quite as pronounced. So,
and in Egypt, before he flips it off of you real quick, it does have them on the equinox. It's about a sun's width off, though, isn't it, on that declination line? But a lot of these bumps right here, if you'll look, they're metered out over time. And so it's over a period of time, and they say, well, this goes with moon cycles going with things, and they're picking out in-betweens. They have other ones like Canopus and Sirius and things that are pegging out also. But that'd be just certain temples. But he's going to tell you they were more declimated than Egypt.
in other words, the Hittites were more oriented towards the stars than even the Egyptians. And for the Egyptians, we have known that for 100 years. For the Hittites, we are finding it out now.
Probably the main portion of astronomy that we know of is a lot of the Sumerian astronomy and what the same people versus they call it the ancient Chaldeans. And actually, that later is like Babylonians and more north situation. Ancient Sumer's gone kind of now, and where you see the ancient Chaldeans talked about, and that they had studied the stars and done all these things, and we're hooking up into this group again.
Well, we have known that there was some concern about directions, because this is the highest installation. It's called Yakape of Hattusha. And you can see this bottom of a pyramid, and in the middle is a tunnel actually, and it's pointing due north, as is indicated in this photo. These photos are easily taken. You put a camera on a tripod and leave it there for 3 or 4 hours, and it takes a picture every 20 seconds.
And it makes that little swirl there. That tunnel there, not at the top of the hill where you see that notch, that's kind of lined up with it too. But the tunnel that goes right there, it looks like just a little temple doorway. There's actually a tunnel that runs through there that's kind of wider at the entrance and then coming in, so cutting through that light, and that also is pointing exactly due north.
And then you put the pictures on top of each other, and because the Earth is spinning, you get the spinning effect of the stars around the polar star. So it basically indicates that it's directed towards the north, which is not a big deal, but looks nice anyway. This is one of the pyramid bases of...
Yeah, pyramids. And strange thing about this is, of course, it has a flat top on it, so it's more looking like that, like a ziggurat type. But even though they're using non-perfected stones, they have them that special lock-a-blocked all together, and it looks like the honeycomb skin that you see if you look at a leaf real close and cells. But they are work stone because you can see how pointy that corner is going up on certain angles. That angle still works out with sacred geometry, and he's going to talk about that in a little bit. But it's also made not on a flat plane, but a gradient here. Puts another hip to it, doesn't it? Well, this is all things that are hooked up around inside of this city, and all the people lived outside of it. So there's another pyramid too. Let's look at it because it's lined up also.
Jakob, and this is the other one, which is aligned towards the sunset at winter solstice when this picture was taken last December. And then there are gates, like this one, the West Gate, which is aligned at the sunset at summer solstice. And throughout the city are buildings. Here in the background, this is Temple 7, aligned to the sunset at winter solstice, even though it's not even visible from the very place where the building was erected, at least not from the lower stories. Maybe it was a tall building.
Or a tower. It would have had to have been pretty tall too, to be able to look over that hill rise that's right there and be able to pull off the stunt. But he goes, it's all lined up with it, and they must have had it, and he's just going to breeze by because it's one of those questions where they can't prove it necessarily. But why the hell would it be lined up in something that you go, well, it's on the other side of that mountain, unless you go, well, come up these stairs, and those stairs, and these stairs, and those stairs, and these, and come to the top of the building and see how this all lines up in this hole. Check it out whenever it comes through there, boom, and it lights through a hole onto a certain object that is revered on that certain day. He'll go through a few of those different ones too. This has layers like an onion. So stick with us. We're about to go in part 2, well, about another 8 minutes or so. It'll be in your top left-hand corner, but let's continue.
So this is the kind of alignment that González Garcia and Belmonte have recorded, and that show us that there was a celestial concern of the Hittite society. This is also sunrise during winter solstice, and you can see how some of the temples and the palace in the background catch the first sunbeams.
So these temples are lined up not only to what was going on, but in special positions that they had found before they built the site. This is what I was referring to earlier, where they come from and everything. They came from somewhere near there, but they knew that this had some peaks that they could use because of that. You can imagine people sleeping here and waking up or going through the night and then having this effect going on and going, this is the place. This is perfect. And those plains down there in the distance is great for growing everything. Da-da-da, it gets rainfall. There's a river here. There's a river there running around us. There's one over here. Only problem is this temple over here isn't lined up with this temple over here. And neither one of them are lined up with that temple over there. Well, what's the deal with that? Well, they're lined up to different things, but all three of them are lined up to sacred places with astronomy. So suddenly it goes really actually from nah to everything, yes.
And are illuminated first. And then there are some particular chambers which are also fascinating. This one is chamber 1 out of 2. The function was unclear, but in this time-lapse movie taken during the winter solstice, you see that during this particular day, the whole chamber is illuminated. And it very much looks like it was used during a religious service where the statue of a god or goddess was placed there and illuminated. And so,
somewhat like a king could be of the time, making his declamation, or something like Christ. For this is exactly that time. In fact, it works out for 3 days or so there. There's 3 days that the sun kind of works its way, and he'll make a mention to it, 1 degree per day, till it reaches its lowest point, which is December 21st, sits still for 3 days, December 25th, and rises again to save all mankind and go through another year to the sun god worship. And you're going to see how much the sun, not even all the other things we could talk about, or even the moon, he hasn't even gotten to that with his studies totally yet, but they're on top of it. And you'll see how it connects to that. But first we're going to talk about these ancient sun worshippers and ancient Aryans that were doing this.
Throughout the year, you never get this effect. So it was intentionally built in the middle of nowhere, pretty much. You see it sitting there in the middle of the picture, where it would catch the sunlight during the sunset. Interesting is that behind this, with the row of stones indicated on flat ground, was an artificial pool. And it could well be that the effect of the sun was even amplified by the reflection on the water. You've seen a few indications for that. So they put together some kind of light show, possibly, during their religious festivals.
You notice I looked at her again and then nodded to it on this situation where they figured out, well, there's this deal and there's this place they could fill up and it would hold the water. That's weird, but there's this drain, and what's piping in a drain doing? They had that going on? This is pretty advanced here. And what would it be used for? And then whenever they did this other trick, they figured out, oh man, you know what, that this all could become a pool with no ripples on it, like a mirror, looking at the sky going by throughout the day and night. Now people haven't gotten into that totally off of it yet, but there it is, where you don't have to break your neck looking up, and you can see the same thing mirrored exactly onto you, downwards. If they want to get rid of it, they pop the cork, and nobody's any of the wiser of it happening, these ancient astronomers.
Now, why hasn't that been recognized before? You really have to be at the right place, on the right day, at the right time, at the right weather, and with the right equipment. There is no chance that you run into this. You have to plan these things ahead and then go in the field and be lucky.
You have to verify it actually too. Whenever you make these things and it's all connection and everything, then you have to go back and you have to be there at the spring solstice or the equinox or whatever and watch the sun come up, and hopefully that it's not a cloudy morning or a sunset. And again, like twice he's already mentioned it, and he will throughout this whole thing even more. Some of these things are from the sunset light and some are from the sunrise. So some people don't even get it normally because they're always, well, the sun doesn't come up there. But it's, well, no, actually, it doesn't set exactly opposite. Of course it doesn't this time of year, but this time of the year it sets right there through that gate. So that's a summer sunset gate, isn't it? So this is that, and it all starts to line up, and it's like, wow, that's, and like an onion, it starts going, and we haven't gotten a third of it yet. It gets deep, and with carvings and everything they find out too, and just a sacred rock crevice.
Looking from chamber 1 outside at the day of the winter solstice, but before sunset, and you don't see anything. So we have about 20 minutes per year when it works. During the review process of our paper, a number of archaeologists indicated that there are relatively few documents talking about astronomical concerns in Hattusha, of the many that were found. But in reality, I quote one person who worked on this, saying that a fact that has often been noted is the high proportion of astrological omens as opposed to other Mesopotamian divinatory genres at Hattusha. The number of astrological texts almost equals the total number of texts from the other divinatory genres combined.
And then we're going to stop part 1 here. Part 2 comes up in your top left-hand corner. But he's telling you there about how they said they didn't really have much, and they're like, man, almost if you added everybody together, that's what they have. It's in everything. It wasn't then later derived and then added to. See you in part 2, top left. Peace.